Scott. Well, hey, it's great to be back up here with you all. And I just want to also extend a welcome to all of you watching at home in your living rooms or on your devices. Also to those of you that are watching the recording of this later this week. I love the fact that through the miracle of technology, we get to be together across time and even across space. And so I love that this is a space that we can be together and experience Jesus together right now. Well, as Scott said, we're continuing in the second of our 2 weeks of this series that we're calling Habits of Hope. And the idea is that there are habits or practices that we can do in our lives that will actually shape us to be more like Jesus, to look more like him and like his good news in the world that invites people to ask us questions, to go, there's something different about you. I don't know what it is. Tell me more. And so that's what we're doing. And when I think about this, it actually reminds me of my freshman year of high school where I decided to go out for football. Now, this isn't unusual. Lots of freshman boys decide to go out for football, but the things that I had going against me were numerous. So one, I'd never played football before, and truth be told, I don't think I even really knew the rules of the game when I went out for it. It was just like, hey, this seems like a cool thing to do. My dad played football. I should play football too. The second thing I had going against me was that at the beginning of my 7th grade year, the beginning of junior high, the most awkward time in any person's life, I broke my femur. So largest bone in your body, and I spent literally my whole junior high career rehabbing from that. So freshman year, I'm going out for football, and I had not worked out in just about 2 years. So I was not understanding football, and I was out of shape. And let me tell you, I show up that first morning for football practice, and the coaches are screaming at us, and we're doing things that I've never done before, like burpees, and they're making us run and do push-ups and all kinds of crazy things. And I felt like my lungs were inside out and on fire, like someone had just lit a torch on them. And no joke, I felt like, okay, my limbs, my arms, my legs are just going to like fall off my body right here on the practice field. They're going to have to carry me off, and it's going to be super awkward. So I go home that day, and I am shredded, like completely shredded. I am so sore. Never a good sign when the same day of your workout, you're sore. And I am wondering what the heck I got myself into. But somehow I drag myself out of bed the next day and show up for practice, and the day after that, and the day after that. And about a week in, I realize, hey, my lungs aren't on fire anymore. I don't feel like they're going to come outside of my body anymore. This is a good sign. And then about a month in, I'm keeping up with my classmates. I'm, doing the drills and pushing the blocking sled around the football field and things like that. So I was at this place where, because I had shown up every day to practice and done the drills and been faithful in everything that the coaches asked me to do, all of a sudden, I could do things that 2 months before I had only dreamed of, that I didn't think were possible. My mind and my body had been shaped and formed through the practice of showing up for football every day so that I could do things that I couldn't have done before. So I think in many ways our spiritual lives are actually really similar to me showing up for football practice all those years ago as a freshman. There are practices that we can incorporate into our lives as followers of Jesus that, when empowered by God's love in our lives, will make us look more like Jesus. And that means that these practices will equip you and I to be good news people. Now, these don't work just by themselves, but when Jesus is present in our lives and his love is fueling these, they will shape us and form us. So before we get too far into this, I want to give a hat tip real quick to Michael Frost, who wrote this book called Surprise the World. And this is where I'm getting a lot of the material for last week's message and this week's message. I'm so grateful to Michael Frost for writing this book, and it's been such a help. And if these practices and rhythms are intriguing to you and you're kind of resonating with what we've been talking about these last few weeks, this would be a great book to dive into. It's short. You can read it in a couple of hours or less, and it will send you on your way to living in these patterns. But I want to encourage you, before we start, that just like Scott Leggett said as he was introducing this, that many, if not all of these practices are things that you've already incorporated into your life. These are already things you're doing. So we're not asking you to add a ton of stuff on top of your already busy schedule, because who wants that? No, it's just about thinking about what we're already doing in our lives, and then how do we do them in a way that's maybe a little bit more intentional, in a way that makes Jesus look as good as he is. So to begin to see how this works, I want us to look at a passage of Scripture. So this is from the Apostle Paul, his first letter to the church in a city called Thessalonica, which is in modern-day Greece. And it's going to illustrate what we're talking about here. So this is 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. You're welcome to follow along in your own Bible, or we're going to have it on the screen here as well. But let me set this up for us. So Paul was one of the first Christians, and he had come to this city in Greece and proclaimed the good news about Jesus. And some people had become followers of Jesus, and they were beginning to practice the way of Jesus. But before Paul had gotten done with his work there, opposition arose in the city. There was persecution, and Paul and his companions were forced to leave before they were ready. So what Paul does is he has to leave, but then he sends this letter back to these people that he loved so much to say, hey, now that I'm gone, here's what you need to do to keep on following the way of Jesus in my absence. And so that's where we pick up reading in the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. He says, our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit, and deep conviction. You know how we lived among you for your sake, and you became imitators of us and of the Lord. For you welcomed the message in the midst of severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. And so you became a model to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. The Lord's message rang out from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere. Therefore, we do not need to say anything about it. So the key idea in this passage is that the Christians in Thessalonica had become imitators of Paul and his companion Silas. And the thing about that is that Paul and Silas had become imitators of Jesus. They were practicing the way of Jesus. And so as these new Christians were learning to follow in, to become like Paul and to become like Silas, what they were actually doing was learning to become like Jesus. And so Paul says that because of this, because they had learned to walk in the way of Jesus, their faith and the message and the good news about Jesus had become known, not just in their city and not just in their region, but even beyond that. And notice, this isn't just their words that he's talking about, although I'm sure that they were faithful and bold to speak about Jesus as they had opportunities. It says their way of life is what made Jesus known. So this is how the gospel spreads. As transformed people live lives that showcase something different and provoke questions. The gospel spreads as transformed people live transformed lives that showcase something different and provoke questions. Now, again, as we talked about, there's a lot of religious requirements, so-called requirements out there. If you've been around church for any length of time, you know this. There can oftentimes be pressure to join every Bible study, to join every small group, to join all the service teams. When the campus is open, you're there. And it's not that those things aren't great, but so often we we fill our lives up with all of these religious requirements or things that we feel like religious people are supposed to do. Like, don't drink and don't smoke and don't go with girls who do, the old saying, right? So the thing is that we want to simplify. We're not asking you to do more. We're saying there are 5 practices that you are already doing that can be powerful shapers and formers of your life so that you look more like Jesus and so that people will begin to be intrigued by your way of life. So these practices, if we let them, and if they're fueled by God, as I said, have the power to shape us as a hopeful people. They have the power to make us into good news people, and that is what will transform our city and our region. So these 5 practices are, first, blessing. And if we engage with this practice of blessing, it will have the power to make us more generous people. Secondly, eating. And if we engage with this practice of eating, it will have the power to make us more hospitable people, receiving others the way Jesus has received us. Listening is the third practice. And if we engage with this practice of listening, it will increasingly make us Spirit-led people. Fourthly, learning. If we engage with this practice of learning the way of Jesus, we will become more Christ-like people. People will see Jesus in us. And then lastly, the practice of being sent. And if we engage this practice, we will become more missional people, people that engage and follow the mission of God in the world around us. So we're going to look at all 5 of these rhythms in the rest of the time that we have this morning. So let's begin with the first, with bless. To bless is to bring the goodness of God into the world. It's to show people love through generous acts of service. These could be acts of service that involve finances, your treasure. It could be acts of service that involve time, just showing up and being with people, giving of your time to people. It could be using your unique gifts and talents to serve people generously, or some combination of all 3 of those things, finances, time, or talents. And so these are how we show up and bless the people around us. But here's the thing, it's easy to bless the people that are already like us. It's easy to bless the people that we already like, that think like us, look like us, do the same things we do. This is what leads to the #blessed mentality, right? You see this on social media. People that already have it all and have it all together, showing up on social media, oh, I'm just so blessed, right? And you just want to say, come on, that's ridiculous. The way of Jesus is inviting us to love and serve all. I mean, think about it. Jesus came to love and serve all people, even his enemies. And so Jesus invites us to begin to love and serve those who are different than us, those who we don't know, maybe even those who are our enemies. Because as we do, that's how people see Jesus. So here's the way this looks in my life. So about a year ago, in our neighborhood in SoCal, there was, we live in a townhome complex, and an Afghan family moved in with five boys, so lots of energy in that home. And because of some of the cultural differences, there were some challenges and some tension in our neighborhood as they were sort of learning how to be a good neighbor here in our culture. And so we, spent some time talking with them and just introducing them to here's how we do things, here's how you could be a good neighbor. And our boys began to get to know each other and play outside together. And then a few months back, we found out the parents don't speak very much English, but through the kids who speak a little more English, we found out that the wife was pregnant with a 6th boy. So that's a lot of kids in that home. And so what Katie did, my wife did, was decided to mobilize our community group and to invite them to help us bless this family. And so we bought them baby clothes, and we bought them some of the baby things that they would need, and we got them some gift cards to Target so they could get anything else, diapers or whatever else they might need. Because this is a family that doesn't have a ton of resources, and with 6 kids, the money runs out quick. And so it was a way for us to bless this family, to let them know that we love them and we're happy that they're in our neighborhood. And so this is what blessing can look like in your life. Not just the people that we're friendly with or that we like or are similar to us, but even those who are different, finding ways to go out of our way to love and serve them. And if this is a practice that, as you hear me talking, resonates with you, here's what I want to invite you to do, is to seek and ask God, who are 3 people that I can bless this week? You may want to think about one person that doesn't yet know Jesus. Who's someone in your life you can go out of your way to show them God's love this week? Who's one person that maybe already knows Jesus that you can love and serve? And then leave that third one up to the leading of God's Spirit. Let Him show you who He wants you to bless this week. Because as we engage with this practice of blessing, as I said, God will shape us into a more generous people. And that will only increase the ways in which people see Jesus in us and begin to ask us questions about our faith and what makes us different. So that's the practice of blessing. The second practice is the practice of eating. Now, this is everyone's favorite, right? There are not many of us that don't actually enjoy eating. It's not hard to sit down and put some good food in your mouth around the table, right? So this comes naturally. It's enjoyable. Everyone likes to eat. It's easy. So we have, in our culture, 21 meals a week. 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 21 meals. And that doesn't count things like coffee dates or other ways that you can share a snack or some other food with people. So these are 21 plus opportunities to deepen a relationship with someone over food, over a meal. Because think about it, there is something powerful about sitting down around a table and sharing a meal. I mean, even if you're strangers at the start of a meal, you spend an hour or so together sharing food, sharing stories. And after an hour, a total stranger can be transformed, maybe even into a lifelong friend. You hear stories from their lives. You begin to see what makes them tick. And it begins to deepen that relationship. So this can be a full meal, but even something as simple as a coffee date or some other form of sharing food together can be powerful. Now, this past year has been a tough year around eating. Am I right? I mean, during COVID, most of us have not been trying to share meals with people outside of our COVID bubbles, whatever that looked like for you. We're not ready to just go sit down with a stranger that we've never met and have a meal for obvious reasons. But even so, this year, a number of us that have been trying to engage this practice, we've been connecting for coffee dates or for meals over Zoom. And even though there's an awkwardness, I'm not going to lie, about having a meal over Zoom, it can still deepen a relationship. It's better than not doing it. But even as we're beginning to come out of this season, it's going to make this a practice that's really easy to engage. So here's one way that it's looked like, even this past year. So many of you know Fred Wilson, who's our care and recovery pastor, and he and his wife Wanda live up in Scotts Valley. And those of you who live in Scotts Valley will remember that this winter there were some power outages due to weather and things like that. So they have a generator. So there was a power outage one day. They fire up their generator, put a pot of coffee on, make some breakfast, and text some of their neighbors and just say, hey, you know, if the power is not on at your place, you can come to our place, have a pot of coffee, charge your phones, whatever you need to do. Our home is open to you. And from what Fred told me, I don't think anyone actually took them up on that offer. But here's where it's powerful. Even the offer of hospitality, even the offer to bring people into your home and to give them food and shelter, endears them to people. It's going to make them more willing to ask for help from Fred and Wanda in the future. It's going to lead to conversations as they're walking around their neighborhood. So just the offer of hospitality, not even the actual act of it, but just the offer has the power to deepen those relationships. And so that's what the invitation is to think about how can I use the 21 plus meals to deepen a relationship with someone. Now, this isn't you have to, invite everyone over for all 21 of those meals, but just think about how powerful it could be if you just take 2 or 3 of those 21 meals a week to deepen a relationship with someone, especially people that don't yet know Jesus. What might come of that? So if this is a practice that's resonating with you, again, think about who 3 people might be in this coming week or over the next couple of weeks that you might be able to invite to share a meal. Again, think about maybe one person that doesn't yet know Jesus, one person who already does, and then leave a third slot open for just the movement of God's Spirit to bring to mind or to work through circumstances to bring someone to your table. So this could be sharing a meal around your table. It could be taking some food out to the beach. It could be just grabbing a coffee, whatever. It's an opportunity to build relationship. So that's eating, the second rhythm. The third rhythm or practice is listening. So what we mean by listening is the practice of intentionally setting aside time to listen to God. So for most of my Christian life, I've spent my time talking at God, asking God for things, telling God how I feel, telling Him what I want Him to do or how I want Him to show up. And it's not that those things are bad, but it's just imbalanced. It's a lot of me talking. If you've ever been on a date like that and one person talks at you the whole time, that's not a very enjoyable experience. So the practice of listening is simply setting aside time to listen to God. And this is powerful because I don't know about you, but oftentimes in my Christian life, and especially when I think about this idea of being a good news person, I can feel like it's up to me to make things happen. I need to be thinking and I need to come up with some strategy, or I need to look and go, what's the best way to make things happen? But here's the deal. God is already at work around me. God is already at work around us. And all we have to do to know what the next right thing is simply be present and quiet and allow His voice to speak to us and tell us the next step of the way. So one way that this has looked like, again, in my life was when my wife and I moved to Tacoma about a little over 10 years ago. We were in a poor neighborhood in Tacoma, and we were trying to figure out how do we get to know our neighbors. And we were having a hard time connecting. We're white, rich, middle class, and we're in this poor neighborhood in Tacoma, and we're from California, and we're just different. So it was hard to connect. So we just began praying, God, show us opportunities, give us opportunities. What do you want us to do? And then lo and behold, one day there's a knock at the door, and it's our neighbor Vic. And he needed to leave for work, but accidentally locked his keys and his phone in the car. So he's locked out of his house, he's locked out of his car, and he asked us if he can use our phones to call his wife to come and open up the doors for him so he could get off to work on time. So we did, and we let him stay at our house till his wife arrived, so he wouldn't be rained on standing outside in the wet Washington weather. And it was an opportunity to show him that we love him. But here's the thing, because we responded to that opportunity that the Spirit presented us after we'd been praying, the next week, Vic and his wife invited us over to their house to share an anniversary dinner with them. I know it's weird, but they invited us to have an anniversary dinner with them, and it was an opportunity. It was like our foot in the door to begin to get to know them as people, to hear their stories, and for them to get to know us. All because we had stopped and asked the Spirit and spent time listening and waiting for His response. So if this is a practice that resonates with you, I want to invite you to begin by maybe just setting aside 5 minutes a day to be still and to be silent and to be alone. And you just ask the Spirit, show me what you want me to do. Show me the next right thing, and then just be silent. Because as we practice this intentional listening, as we listen to His voice in our lives, we can grow into people who are increasingly led by the Spirit in the midst of our everyday lives. So that's the practice of listening. The fourth practice is the practice of learning. And learning is a habit and an intention to intimately know and be known by God. We oftentimes think of learning in terms of just like intellectual, like let me stuff as much facts and information into my head as I possibly can. But really learning, if we think about it biblically, involves the whole of who we are: mind, body, soul, strength, spirit. And so in order to do this, it involves regularly setting aside time to be with Jesus and to be formed by him. So the way a number of us are doing this is through a process called the spiritual exercises. And it's a way for us to engage Jesus through passages of Scripture, primarily from the Gospels, where we just show up and we imagine ourselves there with him and allow his voice through our imaginations to speak to us and to shape us and to form us. It's developing a rich and intimate relationship with him. So many of you know Rebecca Christensen, who's our director for Connections. She went through this process with us last year, and here's what she had to say about her experience. She said, "I'm amazed at the intimacy of the dialogue I have had with Jesus. He shined his light into the vulnerable places of my life and heart, not in judgment, but with his gentleness and abundant love. He led me into healing and freedom in areas that were holding me in bondage, some that I was even unaware of. And his light on these areas brought me a freedom I've never experienced. Many precious moments of my journey are so hard to explain because words do not capture it. Jesus has led me through his human experience, which allowed me to accept my humanness. I do not have to have it all together to meet with Jesus. He knows me, loves me, and accepts me right where I am. I'm excited to continue on this journey in his love, walking with him, not running ahead or trying to fix it, but walking with him. And he will continue to lead me in the unforced rhythms of his grace." It's beautiful. And her story is not unique. As we engage Jesus in these kinds of practices, I've been shaped this way. Many of us have been shaped this way. You can be shaped this way. And so, if this is a practice that is resonating with you, here's an easy way to begin. Simply sit with the stories of Jesus from the first chapter of John's Gospel. Try to imagine yourself in these stories. Ask the Spirit to meet you there. And see what happens as you observe and watch the way of Jesus, and even maybe see him begin to talk to you in these stories. Because as we come to know Jesus and his love for us in this rich and intimate way, we will then embody that love as we move out into the world in our everyday lives. So that's the fourth practice, learning. The last practice is the practice of being sent. So the practice of being sent simply means this, that we're intentional about how we live so that people see Jesus and his kingdom at work in our lives. I often think of this idea of being sent or being on mission as we need to accomplish something. We need to go do something. I need to find someone and tell them about Jesus first thing. But really, it's not that it can't look like that. But really, as we talked about last week, it's simply cultivating a way of life that allows God's kingdom to be seen in me and through me in a way that begins to intrigue people, in a way that invites questions. So here's the key question for us, is how much do our lives embody the values and the beauty of God's kingdom? How do our lives embody the values and beauty of God's kingdom? When I think about this, I think about my friends Justin and Brennan, who sadly they moved away from Santa Cruz about a year ago. They bought a house in Sacramento. But for years, they lived in Capitola. And they were so loved by their community and their neighbors. And in fact, there was a few years back where they thought they were going to have to move. There was some issues with their landlord and some things going on with the city, and they thought they were going to have to move. But their neighbors stepped up on their behalf and advocated for them. And so they were able to stay a couple years longer. And when they found out they were going to be able to stay, they threw a party for their block, for their neighborhood. And a bunch of people came, and I just remember being there and watching just how loved this family was by every single one of their neighbors. And I truly believe it was because that they embodied the love of Jesus and the values of the kingdom, and that was attractive to the people around them. They wanted that presence in their neighborhood. And it wasn't that they were going out and preaching Jesus every chance they got. They simply were good neighbors. They were hospitable. They invited people into their homes. They showed the values and the beauty of the kingdom in their lives, and their neighbors loved them for it. So if this idea of being sent is a practice that's resonating with you as I talk about it, here's a simple way to engage. Just begin this week keeping a journal. And at the end of every day or the beginning of the next day, look back on the previous day and see if you can remember ways in which you had opportunities to embody the values of the kingdom, the reality of the kingdom of God in your life. Now, this isn't about judgment or performance, so don't beat yourself up if you recognize that you missed opportunities or aren't doing it as well as you want. That's okay. That's all of us. None of us are living this out as well as we want to. The invitation is simply to begin to notice. Because if we can begin to notice where God is giving us opportunities to live out the reality of the kingdom, we'll begin to notice them, not just when we look back on them, but in real time. So these are the 5 practices. These are the bells, rhythms in which we can see our lives shaped. So the challenge I want to offer us this week is to begin with one practice. Whatever you do, don't go out and try to intentionally think about all 5 of these right away, because you're going to overwhelm yourself and you're going to end up giving up. But think about this week, what's one practice that resonated with me, and how can I engage that intentionally this week? And as I said at the beginning, I just want to say again, the hope is that this is encouraging for you. Because many of us feel, myself included, like we don't measure up, like we're not doing enough, like maybe God's always disappointed with you. But here's the thing, these 5 practices are things that we're already doing. And so the invitation that God is giving us, not in judgment, is simply to begin to allow our lives to be shaped and formed by them so that people can see Him at work in us. That will lead to questions and lead to conversations. So as we finished this morning, we talked about how Jesus invites all of us to His table. And so we're going to have an opportunity, as Scott Leggett said earlier, to receive His generosity towards us as we receive communion together. So as Anson and the worship band are playing through this song, you may want to grab the elements that you're going to use for the bread and for the wine. But as he sings this song called Move, this has been the song that really characterizes this series, because God is on the move. God is on the move in us, and God is on the move through us as His people. And let this be an anthem to move us to join Him in the places He's already at work. Jesus, we thank You that You are here and You are present and You are already at work. We thank You that Your work in the world doesn't depend on us, but that You invite us into the joy of joining You in Your work. Jesus, we do long to be shaped by You. We long to know You intimately. We long for our lives to begin to look like hope and look like good news and look like Your kingdom. So would You meet us through these practices, these simple ways of being intentional in our daily lives to shape us and form us. We love You and pray these things in Your name. Amen. Well, I've been rereading The Lord of the Rings recently, and it reminds me that in many of these great epic stories, the beginning of a journey, the beginning of an adventure begins with a meal. And I think it's the same for us. Jesus gave us a meal, His own body and blood, His own life, to equip us, to empower us, to enter this adventure that he's invited us to, of joining him in his work in the world. And so if you take the elements, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread. And when he had blessed it, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, broken for you. Take and eat in remembrance of me." And on the same night, he took the cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. As you take it in remembrance of me." Now, as we go out this week, may you feel the love and the joy of God empowering you and surrounding you and protecting you as you go about your daily lives. Have a great Sunday, and we will see you back here again next week on Mother's Day. Take care.